It's January 24th, and it's one of my favorite times of the year. And it's not only because, we get to this time and it's a beautiful time of the year. I love the snow, and I love to be able to scout. I love to go in and see what's going on in our bedding areas and what actually took place in the bedding areas. And if there's a lot of rubs, if there's rubs in some, not in others, and that's another topic. What I love about this time of year is we can come out on the property, and the season ended January 7th, and we're not hurting anything for our deer hunting in 2018 or the season coming up. Great time to check out your trail cameras. And of course, we talked about already in a few videos ago, looking at and making sure those deer aren't staring at your cameras and noticing your camera. You want to make sure that it's less than 1% of the time the deer are actually looking at your camera. And when it comes to those mature bucks, I'm always happy, and I have a few cameras every year where a mature buck never looks at the camera, and that's ultimately the goal. Also, it's a great time to look back at your trail cameras, and probably the most important aspect of trail camera and watching deer with a trail camera is how many deer are you getting pictures of during the daylight versus your nocturnal pictures. I look at a good ratio is you should at least be getting as many daytime pictures as you are nighttime, and I mean that with mature bucks too. Mature bucks would be more of a 1-to-1 ratio, but if you're looking at does, fawns, and the general activity on your land, you really should get a lot more pictures during the daylight, 3, 4, 5 times more than you do at night. That means your property activities are doing great, your habitat management practices, your herd management practices, and also your hunting practices and the amount of hunting pressure that you're putting on your land are all at the level that they should be. Now, when it comes to looking back over the entire season, I think you need to take a good hard look at each month, October, November, and December specifically, and just really take a good hard look. How many pictures are you getting during the daylight versus nighttime? And what I like to see, of course, we'll state the obvious. If you're getting pictures of deer during the daylight, doesn't matter if your season opens in September, mid-September, end of September, October 1st, like a lot of states, and certainly into early October. If you're getting pictures of deer at that time during the daylight, you need to hunt them then and not wait. I see a lot of hunters that will wait into the peak of the rut, and they think you got to be out there during that rut when they have this giant monster they've been after, they're getting pictures of in and around a water hole right at daybreak or right at darkness. And folks, if you're getting pictures of deer consistently in October, because they will be consistent then if they're around your property during the daylight, then that's the time to hunt them. And certainly that applies to November. And then when you get into December, if you are the one that has the food source in the area and you have unpressured cover, then it's very likely that you're going to get a lot of pictures during the daylight, especially in that last couple hours of daylight when deer are heading to their afternoon food source. So pretty obvious, when you have pictures of deer, and especially bucks that you're after during the daylight, you need to go after them at that time. Don't wait for what you think is a better time when those deer could easily be somewhere else. One quick point, mature bucks in October, if they're on your land all the time, frequently during the daylight, the one time where you can expect them to leave is during the peak rut. So more of a gamble at that time waiting. We have a buck that's hit this camera right over here on a water hole during October, during that period, laid down a ton of rubs around the area. And I neglected to hunt them during the same time, even though the cameras told me the year before this is the time to hunt them. You just think, wow, they're going to be around during the peak rut. I didn't do it. So I need to listen to my own advice. Now, when you go through, you look at October, I want to talk about some nocturnal pictures. When you start seeing a nocturnal deer herd in October, in the end of September, take a really good hard look at your practices for hunting around the opener of the bow season. Notice the difference between before the opener and after the opener. But if you're getting a lot of nocturnal pictures the end of September and October, there's a lot of reason to raise a red flag. That either means you don't have the cover they want, you don't have the food they want, or the hunting pressure that you're applying is just too much for the property to bear. I'm hunting properties of 45 acres of cover or smaller, and you can actually hunt them all season without applying too much pressure. Now, it doesn't mean you hunt every day, every weekend, but you can hunt consistently, especially the cold fronts I like to hunt, and not apply too much pressure. So when you're already seeing nocturnal deer in October, that's cause for concern, because those deer are not laying back in a knoll 200 yards away waiting to come onto your property when it gets the middle of the night, and that's the only time they move. In fact, they're feeding 5 times a day in a 24-hour period. They're on their feet, and if they're not on your land during the daylight or in and around daylight hours within an hour of daylight, then they're somewhere else. And that's a real cause for concern when you're already in October. So take a good hard look at what you've been doing. When you get in November, if things change, you had daylight in October, you don't in November, that's a time to really look at your hunting practices, look and see if your food's being depleted, look if your cover sources are being pressured out. But nocturnal pictures, mostly nocturnal pictures in November, you know, it's great to see bucks that come from a long ways away, come through the property and they're cruising. But if you have a good property and you're doing a great job with the amount of food and cover you have on your property, then you're going to get a lot of daytime pictures during the rut. And so your daytime pictures should fly through the roof during the rut. And if they don't, there's cause for a lot of concern. Now, when you get into the pre-rut, the end of October period, that's a time where if you have local core bucks, you should get a lot of pictures at that time. And during the day too, they should be very active. And sometimes your neighbor 2 miles away, they're getting a ton of pictures during that time frame, and you're noticing the rut hasn't started yet. Well, the rut starts at the same time every year, folks, but that doesn't mean the rut's starting in your area if you don't have a lot of mature bucks on the property. So really pay attention to those daylight nocturnal pictures during October, November. And then when you get into December, if you're getting all nighttime pictures and you have a great food source, there's an opportunity that's being missed, because those deer love to feed on a great food source about an hour to 2 hours before dark every single day. That's their number one feeding out of those 5 during the day. That afternoon feeding is their big dinner time feeding. They don't want to miss that. That sets their clock every day. They'll feed an hour and a half before dark every single day. And if they're not, and they're hitting a great food source you have at night, that's could be cover related, but deer can get away with some adequate cover. But hunting pressure by the time you get into December is glaring. The properties that have too much hunting pressure, it's just incredibly obvious to the deer herd, and most deer properties are overpressured by that time. So if you have a great food source in December, and the deer are hitting it regularly at night, think about a missed opportunity. Where could you apply less hunting pressure? Where could you possibly build the cover and increase the amount of deer that are hitting your cameras during the daylight? But finally, when it's all said and done, what you're trying to do, number one, is of course increase the amount of daylight pictures on your property. Make sure that you're 50% of the pictures on mature bucks, you're getting at least half those pictures during the daylight, and that greatly increases during the rut. But number one, you want to control that afternoon food source. So if you allow those deer to bed in or near your property every single day, unpressured, you allow them to feed on a food source that you have, specifically a food plot like we're standing on right here, every single afternoon, you don't pressure them. You control that afternoon food source movement, so those deer are hitting that food source an hour and a half to 2 hours before dark every single day. Then the entire season, if you allow that to happen, your number of daylight pictures should shoot through the roof. And that's what I see on a lot of properties. You could analyze daytime, nighttime, cover, food, and hunting pressure, but ultimately it boils down to, if you create that afternoon food source on your land or around your land, allow that to take place every day. And ag is not a great determination and definition of afternoon food source, because it's always changing, it's being harvested, plowed under, crops are rotating. You need to control that afternoon food source. We do it with food plots, high quality food plots in small locations. This is a little over an acre right here. And then the deer after dark leave and go out on the ag fields around here. You don't want to have that nighttime property where they're feeding. We want deer to only feed on this food plot about one time in the afternoon, maybe a little bit in the morning, so we're only putting 1.5 feedings out of 5 a day. If you control that afternoon food source, then your number of daytime pictures for bucks and does will fall in place. Allow that to take place every season, all season long, and you establish a reputation in the neighborhood by the local deer herd that your property is the daytime property, and you want all the other ones around you, selfishly, to be nighttime and nocturnal. Take a good hard look at your cameras. We love this time of year. We can drive on the property. I haven't stood in this spot for a month and a half or two, and it's amazing the scrapes and rubs that are here. We have a redneck blind right over here. I wanted to put a camera in this spot for a while, because this tells me exactly that redneck blind is approximately 37 yards. I've ranged this tree quite a few times sitting in it, and you know, this location will tell me a lot about what's moving by, specifically in this stand location. We'll probably keep a camera on the water hole over here. But time to get out, check your cards, and check those daytime versus nocturnal photos, see what your ratios are, and then make plans accordingly, because it's January 24th. We have a lot of time to make changes for the better. A lot of times it boils down to just plain old hunting pressure. So good luck this season. Check out your trail cameras, see what they're telling you.